In the program Spotlight, now we bring you an interview with Union Minister of State, Independent Charge for Development of Northeastern Region and MoS in PMO, Dr. Jitendra Singh, with special correspondent Ms. Mattu JP Singh.
Sir, in view of lockdown, what systems have been in place so that all essential supplies reach Northeast and Union territories of Jammu and Kashmir?
No, first of all, I would just like to reiterate that there is no shortage of essential supplies at all, and therefore there should not be any apprehension or misgiving, even at the public level. And having said that, especially for Northeast and the two Union territories of Jammu, Kashmir and Ladakh, as well as the island territories, under the directions of the Honorable Prime Minister, the air cargo facility was made available on priority. And even now, whenever required, and whenever a requirement or a request comes from any of these destinations, the air cargo facility is made available at a short notice. And depending upon the nature and the quantum of the consignment, then it's either the Indian Air Force or the Air India which gets into service. In fact, on the 25th itself, at the 30th late night, Northeast received its first consignment when an Air India aircraft landed at Guwahati. The very next day, we had an Air Force consignment in Nagaland, Dimapur, and then this process has continued. Similarly, we have had regular supplies of air cargo consignments with essential supplies in Ladakh, which continued even till yesterday. And of course, since yesterday, they have also opened the road link through the Zojila Pass, which normally remains closed during the winter months and resumes only somewhere towards the end of April or May. But considering the situation that we are going through, that was opened up earlier, for which, of course, the Border Roads Organization also deserves to be complimented. Similarly, Srinagar has been receiving regular supplies. We had an air cargo flight yesterday also. And let's also not forget that the interstate transport of essential supplies was permitted right from the beginning, soon after the lockdown was announced. And therefore, as far as Jammu and Kashmir is concerned, because the Jammu region particularly is directly linked through the road link with Punjab and the rest of India. And till yesterday also, there were as many as about 12,000 or more truckloads through road crossing in through the Lakhanpur entry point, which happens to be the gateway between Punjab and Jammu Kashmir. So there has not been any dearth or any shortage of supplies at any point in time. And we have sufficient store of supplies both in the northeast as well as in Jammu Kashmir, so also in Ladakh. And even if there is any specific requirement, we have an arrangement in place to meet it or respond at a very short notice. It could be even late hours in the evening or during night.
What has been the impact of lockdown on international borders in these regions?
Yeah, that's quite relevant as far as particularly Northeast is concerned, because the entire Northeastern region is bordering with 5 or 6 countries. And I think the immediate impact and a very positive impact was that we didn't have a single case of corona positivity reported from the state of Sikkim, which is bordering with Nepal. And that's also, I believe, possible also because the Nepal border was sealed very much in the earlier stages. Soon thereafter, there was a complete sealing of the Myanmar-Bangladesh border, which would have immediately impacted states like Nagaland, Mizoram, etc. And I think there's been a huge impact. And that's the reason we have been able to contain the corona positive cases. In fact, we have had only, in the entire 8 states, we have had only 31 cases as of today, out of which majority of them, maybe 26 or so, are reported from Assam, because Assam is directly linked with the rest of India, and it also had an inflow of the Tablighi followers and the other contacts. And there are a number of states which have not reported a single case. Besides, for example, Assam, we have 2 cases reported from Manipur. We had 1 from Arunachal, 1 from Mizoram, and 1 today from Nagaland. Besides that, many of these states have remained totally untouched, whether it's Sikkim or some states like, for example, Meghalaya. We had 1 actually from Arunachal as well. So I think out of 8 states, at least 3 or 4 states remain totally unaffected and untouched, and even rather I would say unfamiliar with all the corona crisis that has gripped the rest of India. So that has been to a great extent possible because of the effective and a very strict sealing of the international borders, which could have actually encouraged more number of cases becoming positive and could have increased the prevalence.
Regarding health infrastructure, sir, in the Northeast, what are the projects we are looking at?
Now, of course, like in rest of India, we had initial issues because you see, not only Northeast or Jammu and Kashmir, even in the rest of India, we were taken aback to a certain extent, including the medical fraternity, because over the last 2-3 decades, the medical fraternity had by and large been engaged in the management of non-communicable diseases, for example, diseases like diabetes or heart attacks or cancers, and the infectious diseases and the communicable diseases had been by and large conquered with the advent of the availability of the effective antimicrobials and antibiotics. So gone were the times when we had number of infection epidemics happening in India, one after the other, whether it was plague, whether it was tuberculosis, whether it was cholera. So to that extent, even the medical fraternity had to gear up. But this is a reflection of the immense capacity of India's health structure, which has now been acknowledged by the rest of the world as well, that we could reorient ourselves to the new requirements of health management overnight, whether it was the practice of the non-medicinal methods of maintaining hygiene, social distancing, etc. And of course, specifically as far as the equipment is concerned, like in other parts of India, we had initial constraints or apprehensions of not being able to provide enough number of ventilators if God forbid that kind of necessity arises, and of course the issue of PPE kits. But I'm glad to say that Northeast has always been given very high priority by Prime Minister Modi, and even in this crisis, it was made sure that Northeast did not by any means suffer a disadvantage compared to the more developed states or more mainstream linked states of India. We had actually ventilators being placed in some of the major institutes right in the early days of lockdown. For example, we have that RIMS Medical Institute in Manipur, where in a single go 10 ventilators were installed, and likewise a number of other states also went on procuring for ventilators, even though they did not actually put them to use, and thankfully they didn't have to put them to use, because we have had only one death in Silchar in Assam so far. Otherwise, the cases have been positive, but not all of them symptomatic. And the MoS are concerned, we have had a great help from our self-help groups. Let's not forget that in Northeast, we have a very rich tradition of women self-help groups, which sometimes I cite as an example when I visit other parts of the country. So we have very vibrant, very active, and very dedicated self-help groups. These self-help groups, many of them mostly comprising women, have come out with homemade sanitizers, which are remarkably equally effective. So from that point of view, I think there's no room for any kind of an apprehension.
What provisions have been made for gap funding to fight COVID-19 pandemic?
You see, of course, there has been exclusive funds and packages announced by the Prime Minister, which all of us know, and I don't need to repeat. But in addition to that, by the Ministry of Northeast, the Ministry for the Development of Northeast Region, or DONAIR Ministry as it is popularly called, though it is primarily the mandate is to deal with the developmental works and infrastructures, but since it is also a coordinating ministry, so we are looked upon by everybody to step in at times of crisis. So in the very beginning also, to begin with, we placed rupees 25 crore on behalf of the Northeastern Council, which is affiliated to the Ministry of Development, at the disposal of the 8 states. And we also accordingly try to distribute the amount depending upon the magnitude of the corona issue faced by each of the states. For example, Assam was facing it at a larger scale, so they were immediately provided with rupees 5 crore. In addition, we have in the Northeast infrastructure funding scheme sector which is devoted purely to the health sector. And we made required amends so that any of the states in Northeast could avail of that entire health fund for purpose of corona, and that would be made available to them immediately. In addition, the Northeastern Council headquarters in Shillong, which is a headquarter with a legacy because it is since the times when Assam was the Shillong was the original capital of Assam, the undivided Assam, that headquarter complex itself has been converted into a kind of a control room. And I think, in fact, much of the funds that we have made available to the Northeastern states have not been even fully utilized. The funds which have been made exclusively for the corona purpose, which in itself is a healthy sign to the extent that they possibly didn't require to do that. In fact, I was just before this phone call, I was speaking to some of the authorities in Assam and telling them that you still have a lot of money pending in your kitty, which has been donated by the Ministry of Donair, which you are required to use for corona purposes. And if you don't, then it would not be there in your exchequer, it will go back. So just give it a serious thought if you have any other requirements where you could actually spend it. So same way we were speaking to the authorities in Manipur where they have had 2 corona positive cases. So in other words, I think we can sufficiently conclude that the funds which have been made available to the Northeastern states from various sources are in fact more than adequate, and as of now, even those funds have not been fully utilized.
Sir, masks are now compulsory, and sir, what do you see the effects of wearing masks and social distancing taken together to fight this pandemic?
No, as far as social distancing is concerned, as you would have seen even in the rest of India, there were initial problems about actually understanding what it is all about. So I would rather put it that it's not social distancing, it is physical distancing, because you can still socialize by other means of communication which are now available in abundance. So it took some time for people to understand what it was all about, because as I said, it was a new experience for India, like for the rest of the world. So then the trend started of putting those round circles in one of these states. In Northeast, it began from Meghalaya, and soon it was picked up. So now gradually people have understood the reason, and after the positive cases became visible, people themselves started becoming cautious. And now I think social distance is being observed even voluntarily. It hardly needs to be enforced as it was possibly during the initial days of lockdown or maybe during the pre-lockdown days. And Northeast, the people in Northeast habitually or by tradition are much more disciplined and civilized compared to their peers in some other parts of the world. So they tend to be very discreet and disciplined even in following these norms. As far as masks are concerned, as I said in response to the earlier query, we have a very healthy and rich tradition over there of these self-help groups. I think masks are available now in abundance in Northeast, the homemade masks. And these homemade masks are being prepared in such fancy designs that they look more attractive than the masks available in the market. It was only in the initial stages, that is again before the lockdown was declared, that some people started panic buying of face masks from the market, as a result of which there was shortage of masks in many of the districts reported. Even in Jammu and Kashmir, we had shortage of masks being reported from Jammu city in the initial stages. But later on, it was realized, and the people were also educated, that they don't necessarily require those N95 masks. They just have to avoid a droplet falling from the other person. And they could also realize the option of having homemade masks. And therefore, now that issue is now, I think, overcome by and large. People now do not have to face shortage of masks.
Thank you, sir, for joining us on the program.
You are listening to an interview with Union Minister of State, Independent Charge for Development of Northeastern Region and MoS in PMO, Dr. Jitendra Singh, with special correspondent, Ms. Mattu J.P. Singh. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.com. You can also follow us on the News on AIR app for updates. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.